Good evening. Welcome to the beginning of our 2024 Lenten series on the theme of legacy. What are you leaving? Thank you for being here. I'm really sorry I can't be with you in person tonight. As you know, I'm in London, where it is currently 12:30 on Thursday morning. So this is not live. I recorded this yesterday in my office at church before I got on the plane. So thank you for being here, and I can't wait to be with you next week. Three friends were looking back over their long and illustrious lives, and they were thinking about how they would like to be remembered in their funerals. One of them says, well, when my priest gives a sermon, I would like her to say, here lies a woman who was a good wife, a loving mother, a loyal friend, a pillar of her community, and a great servant of the church. The next one says, well, at my funeral, I would like my pastor to say that this man was a skilled worker, a devoted colleague, a respected professional, and an accomplished leader. And the third says, well, when my pastor is preaching at my funeral, I want him to look down at my coffin and say, look, she's moving. So that's where we are this Lenten time. Lent is traditionally a time where we do some self-reflection, where we prepare for death. And I want to thank you for being here, because to set aside time, let alone an hour for 5 consecutive Wednesdays. In fact, Ash Wednesday makes it 6. Set aside that time to contemplate death. Is, I think, a courageous thing to do, and in our culture it's really kind of counterintuitive. So thank you for being here. I'm confidently thinking that there are actually some people watching this. You haven't all gone home after the food, but you've stayed for this, so thank you. And I hope that what we look at tonight will just be a very nice, gentle introduction to something which I hope is going to be a really important and practical course over these next 5 weeks. So why are we doing this course? Well, first of all, because I owe it to James. James was in a coma and he was not going to wake up from it. His wife had been called, his family had gathered. I had been called as well, even though James and his family were not parishioners. And James had made no preparations for his death. He had done no planning financially, so no one knew what he wanted his belongings to go to. No one knew what to do with anything like a funeral. No one knew anything about any kind of medical care that he may or may not have wished to receive while moving towards death. So no one knew whether to withdraw the feeding tube or to continue that. The family were left to debate, in fact not debate, but argue about what to do in terms of his end of life medical care. And so the family stand around the bed, confused and bewildered. They have their own grief to cope with, which is huge. And then they also have this additional burden of, what do we do now? What did James want? Nobody knows. So that was the day I decided that encouraging people to prepare for their death was something really, really important. I owe it to James and to his family. We're also doing this because the church expects this of us. It expects it of me. This is what was said at my ordination service. This is directly from the English ordinal. A priest is called by God to work with the bishop and with his fellow priests as servant and shepherd among the people to whom he is sent. He is to proclaim the word of the Lord, to call his hearers to repentance, and in Christ's name to absolve and to declare the forgiveness of sins. He is to baptize and prepare the baptized for confirmation. He is to preside at the celebration of the Holy Communion. He is to lead his people in prayer and worship, to intercede for them, to bless them in the name of the Lord, and to teach and encourage by word and example. He is to minister to the sick and prepare the dying for their death. In other words, I took a vow to do this. So sorry about that. The church also expects it in the United States Episcopal Church liturgy as well. Here is the prayer book, page 445. I know you can all recite page 445 in your sleep, but just let me remind you of it now. The minister of the congregation is directed to instruct the people from time to time about the duty of Christian parents to make prudent provision for the well-being of their families, and of all persons to make wills while they are in health, arranging for the disposal of their temporal goods, not neglecting, if they are able, to leave bequests for religious and charitable uses. The third reason we're doing this is because you owe it to the people you love. The best gift you can give anyone in your family, particularly if you have a spouse or children, the best gift you can give them is to prepare thoroughly for your funeral, for your death, your funeral, your finances, your emotional contribution, your spirituality, the whole thing. It is the best thing you can leave. And so we just must do this. This is a vital thing. Here's what Alan Hunt says. People don't accidentally age gracefully. People don't accidentally die peacefully. And people don't accidentally leave behind legacies of hope, love, and encouragement. These all require intentionality. And so here's the schedule for these next 5 weeks. Next week, we have our good friend David Peoples. You'll know David and have received much from his ministry in the last few years. He will be here next week to talk about medical care at the end of life. As you know, David is the hospice chaplain locally, and so he has a wealth of experience and profound wisdom to share when it comes to giving us some insight into the workings of hospice and the medical side of preparing for death. The week after that, we have a trained and licensed counsellor named Kim Smith, who is coming to us from Huntsville, and she has a particular specialism in the area of ethical wills. Now, an ethical will is what you leave to the people you love that is not tangible, like money and possessions. This is your gift of wisdom and experience and spirituality to your family, and she will explain how helpful that can be, and also give us some practical advice on how to go about recording our greatest hits, our greatest moments of wisdom and insight, and our desires and intentions, those things that will survive a long time after we are gone, either in written form or in recorded form. Then on March the 13th, Claire Cotton from the diocese is going to be here to talk about the financial aspect of preparing for death. So that's the territory of wills, but not the nitty-gritty of wills. This is more about how and why to leave money for good causes, including your local parish. And then we finish off on March the 20th with our very own Helen Wells, who you know is an estate attorney, and she is going to help us think through some more of the practicalities of the legal side of all this. So if you are currently drawing up a will, or if you have never got around to it, or if you have a will but you're thinking about amending it, then I know that Helen will give some really practical advice and answer any questions that you may have. Let me tell you something of my personal story. When I became an empty nester just a few years ago, I felt the urge to research my family tree. Now, genealogy is not something that people in the UK are as into as people in the United States. You know, if you are a white Brit, hey, guess what? Your ancestors are from Britain, okay, and Ireland, and that's it really. So there's not an awful lot of surprise there, and so it's not really as big a thing as it is for a nation of immigrants such as the United States. But nonetheless, this rite of passage, saying goodbye to my final child as he left home, did do something within me that wanted to make me more fixed and permanent and rooted. And so I felt this urge to research my genealogy. And I found it fascinating and also tragically sad. I knew very little about my grandparents when I began the project, and I knew also very little by the time I'd finished the project. I could find almost nothing about any of my great grandparents. They seem to have left no mark on the world and no achievements worthy of being preserved in history, no books written, no ideas incubated, no projects that shaped people's lives, no service that make the world a better place. And I thought, is that it? Is that what my life will amount to? How is it possible that within 100 years no one even knows your name? I also did 23andMe and discovered that, you know, surprise, surprise, 97% of my ancestry is from the UK and Ireland, but the other 3% is Italian. I am 3% Italian, which I found really quite shocking, and I wondered how this came to be. You know, and I imagine in my narcissism that this was probably like Julius Caesar when he invaded Britain. You know, that he fathered some child, and you know, by and by, you know, I was born, and you know, I'm a descendant of Julius Caesar. Let me tell you about Larry Sievers, because his example, I think, is very interesting. Sorry, it's Leroy Sievers. Leroy died in August 2008 after a lengthy time of living with cancer. In July 2007, he reflected on his legacy in an interview with NPR. "We're all going to die," he says. "This applies to those suffering with cancer and those who will die in their sleep in their 90s. When we are gone, how fast will we disappear? How long before time erases any trace that we were ever here? Dust to dust is not just a figure of speech. We'll live on for a while in the memories of those we've touched, but over time those too will fade along with the pictures. Doctors told me I was supposed to die 13 months ago, then 7 months, then next month. They've been wrong every time, but at some point they're going to be right. What matters now is what we do now. Do we touch the lives of others? Do we make a difference?" We're going to now take a little bit of a pause while we read together Psalm 90. This is a psalm which is often used at funerals. I think you have the prayer book on your table in front of you, and so I would now invite you to take up that prayer book. And please turn with me to page 717, page 717. And we're going to read Psalm 90 together. If you would like to stand up and stretch your legs, please do so. You don't have to, but let us read together Psalm 90. Lord, you have been our refuge from one generation to another. Before the mountains were brought forth, or the land and the earth were born, from age to age you are God. You turn us back to the dust and say, "Go back, O child of earth." For 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it is past, and like a watch in the night. You sweep us away like a dream. We fade away suddenly like the grass. In the morning it is green and flourishes. In the evening it is dried up and withered. For we consume away in your displeasure. We are afraid because of your wrathful indignation. Our iniquities you have set before you, and our secret sins in the light of your countenance. Our iniquities you have... When you are angry, all our days are gone. We bring our years to an end like a sigh. The span of our life is 70 years, perhaps in strength even 80. Yet the sum of them is but labour and sorrow, for they pass away quickly, and we are gone. Who regards the power of your wrath? Who rightly fears your indignation? So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. Return, O Lord, how long will you tarry? Be gracious to your servants. Satisfy us by your loving kindness in the morning. So shall we rejoice and be glad all the days of our life. Make us glad by the measure of the days you have afflicted us, and the years in which we have suffered adversity. Show your servants your works, and your splendour to their children. May the graciousness of the Lord our God be upon us. Prosper the work of our hands, prosper our handiwork. We're going to take a little bit of a break from the video now. So Dionna's going to press stop. And for a couple of minutes, I'd like you to have a think about a couple of questions. And you can do this around your table if you want to involve, half a dozen people. You can do it in pairs if you'd rather just have a quiet conversation with your neighbour. But have a go at these two questions. Firstly, how did that psalm make you feel? Now, often in our tradition, because we tend to be quite, educated kind of people, bookish kind of people, we're used to answering the question, what do you think of that psalm? But I've chosen feel here because there's a lot of feeling in that psalm, and most of it is very somber and very sobering. Okay, so I want you to get in touch with how that makes you feel as you read through a psalm which on the face of it looks fairly gloomy. And then if there was a special verse that jumped out at you, share that with your table or with your neighbour. And see if anyone else has that same verse, and explain why that verse jumped at you. So Dionna, press the stop button, and we'll pick up again in about 5 minutes. Thank you for that. I hope you found that useful. So Psalm 90 is obviously a serious psalm. It touches on heavy topics, notably death and judgment, and the sheer abject humility and smallness and mortality of human beings, particularly when compared to the immortality and the power of God. And that's a good place to be. It's a good place to dwell, lest we become too proud. A preacher named Tony Campolo, an Italian New Yorker, who I think is the funniest preacher I've ever heard, says this: if you ever start to feel proud, just remember that one day you're going to die. Your friends and family will meet together in the church, sing hymns, pray, and talk about you. Then they're going to carry you into the cemetery, put you in a hole in the ground, and throw dirt on your face. Then they're going to go back into church and eat potato salad. So Psalm 90 makes us focus on the potato salad moment. Teach us to number our days, that we may apply our hearts to wisdom. The poet is really in quite a state here. He's verging on despair, but he steps back from the brink with a couple of really beautiful poetic phrases. One of them is right at the end there: prosper the work of our hands. And in the new RSV, the version we read on Sundays, that phrase is repeated: prosper the work of our hands. Oh, prosper the work of our hands. Slightly different in the prayer book version, but there's a real feeling: oh, prosper the work of our hands. In other words, legacy. In other words, let what we're doing now be something that lives on into the future. Okay, life's going to end. That's the focus of this psalm. But Lord, let what we do now, let it live. Prosper the work of our hands so that others might benefit. And the other phrase I find so lovely and poetic is this: teach us to number our days. And I did. I've had 22,068 as of today. The poet says that the days, our days are 70, 70 years, or if we have strength, 80. So that means I have between 3,500 and 7,000 to go. Over 22,000 gone, maybe 7,000 to go. That's what it means to number your days. That brings it home really quite spectacularly. But it means I have 7,000 more days of opportunity to bless other people and to serve God's church and world. I have 7,000 more days to love and to enjoy God's good creation before I go to enjoy the eternal homes. Now, there are many obstacles to considering death, and some of it's just like our culture. We're not living in a society where death is a welcome or attractive subject to talk about. In other countries, and also at other times in the history of this country, people have lived much more closely with death. Death has been not the unwelcome, shocking gatecrasher the way it is in our lives. Death was something you just lived with. People died, and they died at home, and they died suddenly. They died after long illnesses. They died after accidents. They died of malnutrition. They died of preventable causes. Death was just a part of life that you couldn't really escape. Now, because of our sophistication, we've been able to put a hedge around death and treat it as if it's an imposter, whereas in fact, it's a regular part of life. So here are some of the obstacles that we face. Firstly, fear. Now, I read this extraordinary statistic in more than one place when I was researching for this last week. That said, these statistics, the researchers who had found that in questionnaires, 20% of the population of the United States say they fear death. 20%, which makes me think, 80% are liars. Either that or they're not really thinking about it, because to think seriously about death, to look at it fully in the face, is to have fear. I mean, it just is. That's a human response. So I think that 20% is a ridiculous number. And I think when you stop the average person in the street and say, are you afraid of death? 4 out of 5 say no, because it's the furthest thing on their minds. They're not going to think about it. And that's why they're not afraid of it. So 20%, no. It's 100%. If it's not you, the earth is yours and everything in it. Seriously, you have my respect and my my honour, and I want to learn from you. Don't die just yet. Second is short-termism. I was thinking about democracy, the way you do, and sure, it is the best form of government that fallen humanity has come up with yet. But it has some big weaknesses, and I think the biggest one is short-termism. Nobody is motivated to tackle big long-term problems. 2 big long-term problems that we are facing right now, the possibility of sea levels rising. I'm not getting into debate about, climate change, but just the possibility that, cities on the east coast of the United States, as well as on the west, could be like significantly underwater in the next 50 years. Even if that's disputed as sort of like scientific theory, even if it's just slightly possible, it demands a debate, doesn't it? And yet I don't think you'll hear that being talked about in the run-up to the election in the autumn. Similarly, the crisis that we're about to enter in a few years in social security, when the fund runs out of money. Again, I don't think either of the presidential candidates are going to talk about this, and it's short-termism. It's because to tackle a long-term problem in the short term means perhaps making unpopular decisions, and that means not being elected. And in a 2-year election cycle, which we have for Congress, and a 4-year election cycle for president, nobody is motivated to look at a problem which is going to arise in 10 years or 20 years. And that means they're not going to look at death either. We're just going to kid ourselves that today is all there is. Third is what I call a culture of denial, which I think surely exists in our country today. And I've divided it into 2 parts. This is my phrase, okay? I made this up. You can use it, but if you hate it, I'm sorry. It's mine. I didn't read it anywhere. What I call the immortality industrial complex. By that I mean that there is this entire business out there devoted to the denial of death. You see it, in funerals and in all of the business that goes on around funerals. You see it in the language that we use. So we have, for example, no longer a funeral, we have a celebration of life. We no longer have people who die, We have people who pass away. Uh, Speaking of which, I try never to use the phrase pass away. I try always to use die and death and dead. And if I say that in your presence and you're offended by that, I don't mean any kind of disrespect. I just simply want to state things as they are and not collude with with the denial of what's really happening. We talk about caskets, not coffins. A casket is where you keep treasure. A coffin is where you put a dead body. I'm kind of thinking that it won't be long before we call hearses life transition vehicles. Because a hearse is where you put a dead body, so we don't want to think of it in that terms. We'll think of it in terms of it being a life transition vehicle. That's a joke. It's not serious. I hope I haven't offended you. But I think you can get my point, can't you? And please, we're going to talk about funerals shortly. Please, for your funeral, do not choose what I'm about to read, okay? Because, yeah, well, I don't need to say anything. I'll just read it, okay? This is by a Church of England clergyman, all right, called Canon Henry Scott Holland. And I've heard this at funerals. Death is nothing at all. I have only slipped away into the next room. I am I, and you are you. Whatever we were to each other, that we still are. I'll cut out a bit now and go down to life means all that it ever meant. It is the same as it ever was. There is absolute unbroken continuity. Why should I be out of mind because I am out of sight? I am waiting for you, for an interval, somewhere very near, just around the corner. All is well. Well, I'm sorry, Father Scott Holland, all is not well. My loved one has just died, and I'm in grief about that. And the reality is they have not just slipped into the next room. Death is not nothing at all. And that I chose to read to you tonight, just as an example of some of the denial that I think can impact even us Christians who are supposed to have a biblical understanding of death and eternity. There is eternity, but it's not in the terms that Scott Holland has just said. So along with the immortality industrial complex, there is the cult of youth. Aging is undesirable in our culture. Hollywood actresses find it hard to get a job after the age of 40. And after the age of 50, they can only get a job if they've had plenty of work done. By that I mean, like their face and body. I don't mean like their body of work as an actor. There is a vast anti-aging industry. Let me just show you this graph. This is the global anti-aging market. A company called Vantage Market Research has put this together, and it is valued at $63 billion. In the year 2022, projected to reach the value of $106 billion by the year 2030. The global market is anticipated to grow, exhibiting a compound annual growth rate of 6.8% over the forecast period. Now, if you can tell me about some stocks and shares that are guaranteed to rise at a compound annual growth rate of 6.8%, I'm in. Here's $100. Please invest it for me. $106 billion. Now that is global, that's not just the United States, and it also includes not just cosmetics, but procedures and surgeries as well. But it is still a staggeringly large amount of money. What we're missing out on, of course, is Annas and Simeons. they were two great old saints that encountered the baby Jesus in his infancy in the temple in Jerusalem. When I was a vicar in England, I had in the vicarage two ancient yew trees. They were actually planted about 400 years ago. And the way we can be so confident about the time they were planted is that at that time, throughout England, there was a yew tree planting campaign for military purposes. All right, we planted yew trees all over the country because yew trees have a particular flexibility which the wood from other trees do not have, which means that you can make a bow, like for a bow and arrow, from the yew wood that is 6 feet tall. And the English longbow is the name of this weapon that was created using yews. So this 6-foot bow, which could fire arrows 400 yards. That's nearly a quarter of a mile. And the result was that England became like the military superpower, you know, Agincourt and all that stuff, where the English had 6-foot bows that could fire 400 yards. The French had conventional ones that could only fire 200. So it's obvious who's going to win. And the beauty of these 400-year-old yew trees in my garden was a constant reminder to me of the value of Annas and Simeons, the experienced, wise, elderly pillars of the parish who have served the church and the world in the heat of the day and are now at a position to pass on their wisdom. And the importance it is of younger generations to consult the Annas and the Simeons. A philosopher called Susan Nyman says she finds this very troubling, really, that aging is seen as decline. And she laments, being grown up is widely considered to be a matter of renouncing your hopes and dreams, accepting the limits of the reality you were given, and resigning yourself to a life that will be less adventurous, worthwhile, and significant than you had supposed when you began it. In other words, she says, what has happened where we have started to believe that getting old means losing your dreams, losing the capacity to enjoy life, losing your ability to feel pleasure. Your life is like over because you don't have much money now. You're not consuming as much, you're not creating wealth, so your life just isn't really worth all that much. This is appalling, and yet it is a reflection of our culture, I believe. So look at those lines on your face and don't resent them. All right. I look at my face in the mirror and I see my story. I see the crow's feet here by my eyes. And I actually really kind of like those because they tell me that I've laughed a lot. I have laughed a lot and I can prove it. My story is a story of enjoyment and pleasure. Why should I be embarrassed about that? I look at the lines on my forehead, my worry lines, and I remember that my story also has a lot of pain in it. There were many, many times that I had things that I really should be worried about. Things that really distressed me, and that's part of my story as well, but through that God has preserved me and kept me. And so rather than getting work done on my face, I look at my face and I thank God for the story that it tells, and I try not to resent the story, even though I don't look like I don't even look like I'm middle-aged now. I certainly don't look young, but that's okay because that's God's story played out in my life, and I don't want to deny that. There's one final reason why we find it so hard to talk about death, one of the obstacles. I can't reverse on my slideshow, so I can't tell you show you what it was, but it is neurology. Okay, our brains, get this, our brains are actually wired to stop us thinking about our death. Isn't that amazing? I read this fascinating article in the British newspaper The Guardian. Listen to this. Researchers say our brains do their best to keep us from dwelling on our inevitable demise. A study found that the brain shields us from existential fear by categorizing death as an unfortunate event that only befalls other people. The brain does not accept that death is related to us, said Yair Dor Zeiderman at Bar-Ilan University in Israel. We have this primal mechanism that means when the brain gets information that links self to death, something tells us it's not reliable, so we shouldn't believe it. Wow. I could talk about the research that Dr. Dor Zeiderman did, but I don't understand it, so I won't. Just take his word for it. You are genetically wired not to think about your death. So just to finish tonight, let's move on to the topic of funerals. But before we do that, I would just like to give you another 5 minutes to think and talk on your own or in the community around your table or your partner, just to reflect on anything in those last few minutes that you found particularly useful or interesting. So Dionna's going to stop the video, and so please do use the next 5 minutes to chat about the things that you've just been hearing. And if you have any questions, I'm sure Dionna will be delighted to tackle them. See you in a minute. So welcome back. I hope you found that useful. Funerals. Let me just say then that it's your party, so cry if you want to. I mean, it really is your party. And you, as the person whose funeral it's going to be, should be the person who's in the driving seat when it comes to what happens, which means each of us needs to do some work in planning and preparing and in stating clearly in some form, preferably written or videoed, what you would like. So please do that if you've never done it. And if you want to give a paper copy of that to us at church, we can store that in a safe so that when the time comes, if your family can't lay their hands on it, we'll know what it is that you would like. So I'm going to talk about my personal policy. I know that Dionna's policy overlaps with this really quite a lot. And so I think what I'm about to say is something that, is probably going to be pretty much the policy of St. John's on into the future until at least Dionna and I have retired or died or something. Firstly, cremation or burial. I mean, have a think about this. Some Christians in some traditions say, well, we shouldn't really have I've said creation there. Sorry, that shouldn't say creation, it should say burial. It should say cremation, although creation does put an interesting spin on it, doesn't it? Do you want to be created or buried? Oh, created, please. Cremation or burial. So some would say cremation should not happen with Christians. We should just be buried. And I think the reason for that is that to do with the great resurrection when it happens. God is going to resurrect our bodies, renew them into the spiritual bodies that Jesus had after his resurrection, and then we are prepared for the coming of the kingdom and the new heaven and new earth and all of that great stuff. And I think the reasoning is that if what we are is a handful of dust, if we're cremated, then how's God going to raise us back into human bodies? To which I say, well, if he's going to raise a skeleton back into a human body, can't he also do it with a hand of dust? Burial has no theological significance over and above cremation. So choose whichever is your taste. Have a think about the service, all right? If you have 2 or 3 favourite hymns that you want to be sung, state it. By the way, those should be from the 1982 hymnal. That would be useful. Similarly, Bible readings, 2, maybe 3 Bible readings, and again, ones that that are meaningful to you. Both Diona and I at funerals like to preach, and we like to preach the gospel. Okay, so we will preach one of the Bible lessons that you choose. We won't preach a eulogy, because in a eulogy, it's the person who is the focus. In a sermon, it's the resurrection that is the focus. But there will be personal moments within the sermon. So my approach is to tackle one of the Bible readings, to deliver the message of hope and resurrection that's in that passage, and then link the passage to the life of the person whose burial we are conducting. So if there are moments in that passage that reflect on that person's life, then I will feel free to talk about that at the relevant time. And that way, people go away feeling that this was not an anonymous sermon that could have been done for anyone. It was definitely about their loved one, and they're touched by that, but also that it was biblical, and it wasn't just like the obituary in the paper. It was actually a part of a Christian act of worship. By the way, if you don't want us to preach, that's fine, we won't. Just again, make sure that we know that. We'll have the scripture readings, but we won't have a sermon afterwards. Would you like Holy Communion? It's your choice. Where would you like your body or ashes to be buried? And lastly, is there any Christian poetry or other sort of literature that you might like to be read in the service, or printed on a card that all your guests have? Now, let me say, this isn't like a free-for-all, whatever you would like. You can't have Scott Holland, or that I just read. You can't have that, sorry. So if there is something which, if it's a prayer, if it is consistent with the prayer book, I am certainly very happy to include that prayer. If it is a poem or a piece of prose, again, if the theology is not inconsistent with Christianity, then I am happy for that to be read. That means that there are some things that that shouldn't be read, things which are inconsistent with the Christian faith. But if it's consistent with what we believe and what the prayer book and the scriptures teach, my view is that I'm happy to include that in the service at some appropriate moment. So there we are. I hope that's useful. The next 4 weeks we'll look at other useful practical things. So thank you for being here. Thanks for taking part. Any questions? Just ask Diona. No, any questions, ask me. I'm back in town next Wednesday. I'll be at church Wednesday early morning, and I'll see you in the evening when we welcome David Peoples to talk to us about hospice care and the medical aspects of the end of life. So thank you for being here. God bless you.